Okay, so what the flip is this integral theory? So integral theory is a comprehensive theory of the universe and everything in it. It's based on a comprehensive study and synthesis of all of the world's knowledge traditions. And because it's so comprehensive and so big picture and so meta, it's very, very hard to do justice to it in, I think it might go for 20 or 30 minutes, this workshop part of it. So please be aware there's lots of oversimplifications here. And this is just like a little glimpse that hopefully will give you a bit of a sense of the overall, well, maybe three of the big ideas that come from it. And just to check, Chaitna and Deep, have you heard of integral theory before?
I have, yeah.
No, I haven't.
Oh, fantastic. And Chaitna, you haven't? Okay, so everyone feel free throughout this to ask any questions that come up. And we can stop at any time and go through questions. And if I go too quickly or don't, miss a step or something like that, please just feel free to jump in and clarify, because I think it'll be much better if everyone's along for the ride. Okay, so I'm just seeing something in the chat, just one sec. Kieran says, why does Ken Wilber wear a wig? That's a question we'll come to in a moment. But first of all, let's introduce who Ken Wilber is. So Ken Wilber, he is the originator of the creator of integral theory. But many people over the years have had the goal of creating a comprehensive theory of anything. It's not unique to this bold, ripped guy here. However, this is just, as Sid's dad said, this is possibly one of the most comprehensive theories that we've got access to at the moment. So it's not like this is the be all and end all, but it's just one of the most comprehensive ones we've got. Now, this meme's a bit of an in-joke. Ken Wilber is famous for this expression, every perspective is true but partial. So if you think about it, if you're like trying to weave all of the world's knowledge traditions together into a single map of reality, you're going to have to take a lot of different perspectives and integrate them with other perspectives. And so it's sort of like a patchwork quilt. And so he says, every perspective is true, but partial. It says it illuminates part of reality, but not all of it. And so hence the meme. Yes, I'm a philosopher, stereotypes are true, but partial. So anyway, and that's not his head superimposed on his body as my parents thought. That was literally his body. So there you go. So what's it mean for me? So why is this a topic that, you should listen to? Well, I think there are many reasons why it can be helpful, but here are three reasons. So one, and these kind of fit in with the three big ideas I'm going to share in a moment. It can help you understand the big picture of the universe. Integral theory can help you work out how your life fits into that big picture. And finally, it can help you discover practical ways to evolve as quickly and as smoothly as possible. So pretty good, huh? Like that's, I think, to me, if I saw that list of advantages or benefits, I would be pretty interested to learn more. So let's get straight into the big ideas. The first big idea is that we live in an evolving universe. And basically, the thought here is that evolution is a movement toward more complexity and integration. So, and look, I've done a little star to indicate oversimplification here, because evolution is much more than just that. But that is two of the kind of general impulses of evolution that you see moving from matter, like atoms to molecules to and so on, to life. So from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms. And even in the evolution of culture, we see this movement towards more complexity and integration. So over the 14 billion years of our evolutionary journey as a universe, this evolution has kind of blossomed and flourished through matter, through life, and through culture. As far as we know, humans are at the leading edge of this evolution in some important ways. So our consciousness, for example, is in at least some ways the most complex consciousness that we're aware of. So it's pretty interesting. We're kind of like the leading edge of this 14 billion year long process in at least some ways. So that's the first big idea. And so I guess, yeah, so this idea that we live in an evolving universe, everything is evolving. Everything is made of this evolving energy. This is implicit, this movement towards complexity and integration is implicit in the fabric of reality. The second big idea is that evolution is continuing through humanity's consciousness. So the idea is that evolutionary impulse towards more complexity and integration applies to consciousness as well as to matter. So not only is it that, we get atoms evolved into molecules, evolved into cells, and so on, but actually the consciousness of living beings, it can, it does seem to be getting more complex in at least the human species and other species over time, if you take a big picture view. Now, this occurs in various domains, so emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, ethically, our worldview, but also the very way we make meaning. So even and we'll talk a little bit more about this worldview and the very way we make meaning in just a moment. Do we have any questions or comments at this point? We're just into big idea 2, but maybe I don't want to jump ahead if there's anything. Okay. So let's continue on. So let's look.
Sorry,
oh yeah, Rachel. Yes.
Could you remind us what big idea 1 was?
Yeah, big idea 1. We live in an evolving universe.
Got you. Yeah, cool. Just needed to.
And then number 2 is that evolution is continuing through humanity's consciousness. So let's have a look. And this is, I think, one of the biggest contributions of Integral, is this real emphasis on the way that our meaning making evolves. It's called by many different things. Some people call it like the evolution of your worldview. There's other ways to kind of talk about this. But basically, our capacity to make meaning, this determines how much of reality we see and how we see it. It's related to the work of Maslow, Piaget, and Erikson, and many others, and it evolves through the following stages, which are listed there. Now, just before I go into the details of the stages, I want to give you like a bit of a story that will help make clear what this capacity for meaning making is, because it can be a bit of a subtle idea. So I want you to imagine that there's a forest, and in this forest, there's an object, and there's a tribesperson from the Sinhalese, that Sinhalese island. I think that they maybe have never had contact with the rest of society or sustained contact, and so they're very traditional society, and I think they possibly have speared some people who've tried to come to their island. And so one of these tribespeople comes across the object, knocks it with their foot, picks it up, looks at it, thinks about if they could use it as a weapon or as a tool to make food or something like that. And they realize it's probably not that useful for them. So they put it back down and just keep walking. Next, now it's a bit unusual. I don't know how a Sinhalese tribesperson has walked through this forest, and then suddenly there's a primary school student walking through this forest. It's a bit unusual. I don't know exactly where this forest is located, but anyway, a primary school student then walks through the forest, bumps into the object, picks it up. What's this object in front of me? And they go, oh, it's a book. This is a book. So same object as before, but they recognize it's a book, but it's very complex and it's just words to them. So they put it back down and they keep going. Next, a secondary school student comes, stubs their toe. They were too busy texting their friend. They weren't watching where they were going. They pick up the object. They look at it. Oh, it's a book on maths. Interesting. I see some pluses and some minuses and some multiplications and some divisions, but gosh, it's so complex. I don't really get it. Puts it back down. Next, we have a physics university major coming through the forest. Once again, same object, same forest. Picks up the object. Oh, it's a book on physics. Wow. Quantum physics, really interesting. They understand a little bit of it, but the majority of it is over their heads too. Until finally a professor of quantum physics walks through the forest, finds the object, picks it up, reads it and goes, wow, this is like the latest breakthroughs in quantum physics. What an amazing, and they have all these downloads and all these insights and like, holy smokes, wow. So that story elucidates our capacity for meaning making. It shows that basically our own, the structure of our consciousness determines what we see in the outer world. Each of those people had a successively higher capacity for meaning making, at least in the realm of quantum physics. And so they each gradually could see a little bit more of reality in that realm than the previous person. And so they had an evolved capacity for meaning making, which allowed them to see more of reality. Now, it's worth noting that, you know, quantum physics isn't the be all and end all. There's lots of areas of reality to understand and make meaning from. This is just one very specific example. Does anyone have any questions about that example or thoughts? Nope. Okay. So next, let's look at these different levels of meaning making. So interestingly, if you take all of the developmental psychologists of the last, gosh, I don't know, several decades, and also a whole lot of spiritual teachers, and you try to like integrate their different models for development, so Piaget's model of development, Erikson's, Maslow's, if you try to synthesize all of them, you actually realize there's a kind of common deep structure to all of these models of development. So there's these certain characteristics that they have in common across each of these theories. And so Ken Wilber, one of his great works was a book called Integral Psychology, where he looks at dozens of these different leading theorists and finds a way to synthesize and integrate their different models of how consciousness develops, how meaning making develops, and puts it into kind of a single theory that tries to do justice to all of it. And so here we see these 5 significant levels of consciousness. And we move, as we evolve, we go from the bottom up. And I'm going to quickly explain each of these levels of consciousness. So this describes our overall capacity for meaning making, not just obviously in the area of quantum physics, but just generally in our understanding of the world and the universe. So at the magical level of consciousness, this is often seen in very young children. It's very self-oriented and has magical explanations for phenomena. So yeah, I guess superstitious, but also not really part of a kind of bigger narrative. So an example is, oh, like the sun went behind the clouds because the sun's sad, for example, might be a magical explanation for phenomena. And self-oriented meaning, like a great example for primary school students that we see is for very young primary school students, if you show them a card that has purple on one side and red on the other, and then you show them the red side and say, what side can I see? Which is the purple side. They'll say red because they see red. So they assume that what they see is what you see. So there's not that their consciousness hasn't evolved to the place where they can actually understand another person's mind very well. They haven't developed what psychologists call theory of mind yet. So it's very self-oriented, this magic level of consciousness. The next level up is the mythic level of consciousness, where suddenly humans become more group-oriented. We identify ourselves not just as a self, but also as a member of a tribe or a group. And so here we see sort of traditional explanations for phenomena emerging. This is often, the early adolescence sort of phase, late childhood, early adolescence. And you want to, obviously at that age, it's really important to fit in, and you're so worried about what other people think because you've suddenly got this theory of mind. You can suddenly understand other people's consciousness are looking at you. So it brings a whole lot of insecurity often with it. And there's often traditional explanations for phenomena here. And so a lot of fundamentalist religions fit into this category. They're very tribalistic, very, they can be quite us and them, some of those fundamentalist religions, and they have very traditional explanations for phenomena. It's sort of like superstition, but it goes further because it's a kind of comprehensive network of superstitious beliefs. It's not just like, oh, the sun's sad, so it went behind the clouds. It's like there's a whole series of these beliefs woven together. The next level is the rational level of consciousness. This is where we suddenly have universal values with rational explanations for phenomena. It emerged during the Industrial Revolution in a bigger way. And basically, this is when you're moving through teenage years into adulthood, and you're suddenly able to kind of realize that there are universal values that go beyond just me and my group. So we think of things here like all humans should have human rights, for example. All, you know, we think about ideas like justice and fairness, which cut across religions and cut across groups. And we're more interested in rational explanations, like scientific explanations for things, or logical explanations, not just traditional explanations. Next is the pluralist level of consciousness. This evolved and really became more prominent during the 1960s. This goes beyond the rational world, because it really understands and values minority voices more than the previous stages. It has what's called constructivist explanations for phenomena, which is they basically understand that your worldview determines what you see in reality. So a great example that you know, pluralists are often able to critique colonialism, because you know, often colonialists may actually have had a rational level of consciousness. They may have, you know, like for example in Australia, when we had Captain Cook come here and declare Australia terra nullius, you know, empty land, up for grabs land belonging to no one. He may have had universal values. He may have believed in justice and fairness and so on, beyond, you know, race, color, beyond religions maybe, or beyond groups. But his idea of what sophistication was very white, male, Anglo-Saxon. And so Indigenous people were considered essentially animals. So even though there might have been some universal values, it was like universal values if you're a white male. And so there's not that understanding of how your own value system, your own narratives, your own beliefs actually determine what the way you see the world. And so with pluralism, we suddenly see we need to really value minority voices more. We need to understand what life is like for those who aren't in the positions of power, who aren't in the center, but who are on the periphery. And finally, the integral level of consciousness. There's many more, but this is this is just a simplification. This, more than the previous stages, really values integrating all other values. So weaving them together and synthesizing them together, and it has holistic explanations for phenomena. So more than the other four, it's really capable of balancing numerous competing values and finding kind of win-win situations, and finding explanations for things that don't polarize, but actually take into account the unique value of each perspective. Any questions about that? I've got some more examples to kind of flesh it out, but this is, I guess, quite theoretical and technical at this stage. Anyone got any comments or reflections or questions?
Jody, should I be trying to get to integral?
Should you be
Is that the point?
Should you be squeezing and going, evolve?
Yeah. Is it bad to be something that isn't integral?
Good question. Well, if you think about it, you know, no one gets to mythic without going through magic. So every child is self-oriented and has magical explanations for something. You can't expect a child to suddenly be a pluralist. So the idea is that you evolve through each of these stages, and it's like it evolves in what they call holarchy. I know it's a very confusing word, but essentially just think how, like, you know, molecules are made of atoms, right? Molecules made of atoms, like a bunch of atoms together make a molecule. Then molecules join together to create a cell. So cells are made of molecules. So they're like nested holes, like babushka dolls, right? The idea is that these levels of consciousness are the same. Each kind of builds on the previous one. So the structures of mind, of magic, are actually used within the mythic structure. The integral structure is just, so each of the stages is a bit integral in a way, because it builds on the previous one. But when you get to the integral level of consciousness, more than ever before, it really finds a way to integrate all the previous nested holes. So yes, I think we should all be trying to reach the integral level of consciousness, because as we'll see in a moment, it actually has real practical implications to how we live and our footprint and our capacity to create positivity in the world. So yes, but I think it supposedly it takes like 1 to 5 years to move up a level of consciousness. And you can increase it by doing various practices, which we'll talk about. But it's not just like it happens just by squeezing. Well, maybe it does, and maybe that's a new method no one's worked out yet. So, yeah. Does that help, Kieran?
Thanks, Jody.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go a little further and see how we go. So now there's this really bad bell curve here, which we'll get to in just a moment. I tried to kind of, I don't know, make it so it reflected the colors, but anyway. So an interesting idea here is that basically each of these levels of consciousness is associated with a particular kind of technology, as in a particular kind of technology coincided with the emergence of that level of consciousness. And also because of that technological innovation, there was also a particular mode of society or type of society that evolved for each. So I'll quickly go through each. So the magical level of consciousness, that emerged even in the earliest tribal societies. So that was really around even with the earliest tribal societies. And so that emerged along with, very basic tools. But then when the plow emerged, there was the agricultural revolution, which, liberated more time and resources for humans, because suddenly you could have a bit of a surplus of food. And it basically, this sort of technological evolution created more time and resources for humans, which then allowed them to evolve to this next level of consciousness. So it was kind of like this, there's a sort of mutually reinforcing relationship between technology, society, and the level of consciousness of individuals. Then when more complex machines were created during the Industrial Revolution, like the steam train and the printing press and many others, that allowed the rational level to emerge during the Industrial Revolution. And again, there's more time and resources liberated, which allowed this level of consciousness to emerge. And if you think about it, if there's more time and resources liberated, that means there's more time for humans to communicate with each other, more time for kind of cross-pollination of ideas, and more time for various lines of inquiry. People can investigate and explore and think about and engage in kind of different kinds of, whether it's meditative inquiry or scientific inquiry or whatever it may be, we can start to learn more about reality when time and resources is liberated for our most basic needs. The next level emerged with the communication and information technology revolution, which was a kind of egalitarian society, and this is where pluralism emerged. This was a bigger thing during the 1960s, for example. And again, we see with communication and information technology, there's even better capacity to share ideas than ever before and share information. And so, this tremendous cross-pollination of ideas and, a clash of worldviews, which allows more complex meaning making to emerge, higher levels of consciousness. And then finally, with integral, again, that's, with the communications and IT revolution, as the previous one. And the society with, I'm not going to get into the details, but an integral society is possibly egalitarian, but also technocratic in some domains. But let's not get into the details unless you want to. So here's the really awful bell chart. What I tried to do is I got some statistics from, this was based on US population. I'm not sure how accurate it is. I'll have to dive a little bit deeper to work out, but I think it just gives at least a general sense of the percentage of American adults who are at each of these stages. So we see 5% at the magic level, 12% at the mythic level, most 68% at the rational level, 10% at the pluralist level, and 5% at the integral level, which you can put on a bell curve, as I've done up here, with stage of development along the x-axis and the percentage of the American population on the y-axis. And I've also drawn that over time, we see this bell curve moving. So as I was, we were talking before, we live in an evolving universe. This evolution is continuing through humanity's consciousness. Well, this is what it looks like if you put it on a bell curve. More people are at the rational stage. And if we did a bell curve 2,000 years ago, the center of the bell curve would have been the mythic level of consciousness, because the fundamentalist type and traditional type beliefs about the universe would have been the main thing then. So we see over time more people reaching these higher levels of consciousness, which is quite a positive, optimistic, hopeful view of humanity's journey in the future. Any questions or comments on this? So I feel this is like, I feel almost like this is, I'm a school teacher more than, because it's so technical, but, but I am a school teacher. But I feel like I'm doing school teaching now. All right, very good. So let's move on. So I want to, oh no, did I not fill in this slide? Oh, bummer. It's too complex to do it now. But essentially, I came up with another example that explains why this is important for us to know about, you know, like as human beings. So let's think about the situation where you have a CEO or a director of a company that is about to build a new factory, and he needs to buy a plot of land to build the factory on. And he's got two options. One option is cheap block of land that has a site of indigenous significance on it. The other one is a more expensive block of land that doesn't have, doesn't have any site of indigenous significance on it. Okay, but it's more expensive. It's a very simple example. I'm sure I could come up with a better one if I put more thought into it, but this is the best we've got for the moment. If the CEO is at the magical level of consciousness, he's going to make the decision by going, what's in it for me? Because he's self-oriented. So he's going to maybe go, well, I might get more money, get, you know, pay rise if I go for the cheaper place, the cheaper plot of land, so I'll buy that one. If he's at the mythic level, he'll think, what's the best decision for my company or for my group? And again, maybe the company will have most profit if it goes for the cheaper plot of land with the site of indigenous significance. At the rational level, there's suddenly universal value. So there'll be suddenly some consideration of the needs and interests of the indigenous people who have the site of indigenous significance on that plot of land. However, because it doesn't have that capacity to really understand minority voices with the same degree of sensitivity, they might explain it away and go like, look, overall, it's still better if we buy this plot of land and make this factory there because, you know, it's maybe only a minor site of indigenous significance, and, you know, well, they never really use it anymore. And, you know, like there could be these kinds of, although they might have some degree of universal values, there's not going to be that same sensitivity to the worldview of those indigenous people. If you're at the pluralist green level, it's the director, then you're going to be more sensitive to the significance for the indigenous people. And you may say, actually, look, this site means so much to these people. Maybe the indigenous people have been, you know, experienced a lot of oppression and maltreatment. And so this is just going to further the cycle of abuse and maltreatment. And so we don't want to do that. And so they might say, no, we're going to spend more money and go for the other plot of land. And then finally, at this integral level, maybe you can find a win-win-win-win situation where the plot, you know, somehow maybe you do buy the plot of land that has the site of indigenous significance, but subdivide it and put in place some kind of protective mechanism so that it'll be protected for future generations. But you know, I don't know. So they'll find some solution that try to integrates and works for everyone much more. So that's a bit of a basic example to show how this actually has real life. And if you think about it, if you have a president or a prime minister who's at the mythic level, that's going to be a problem, you know, whereas if they're at the integral level, there's much more hope in terms of the kinds of policies they'll pass. Alrighty. So now we get into the practical implications of this. So given that evolution is continuing through humanity's consciousness, one of our own most powerful contributions to the world may be the evolution of our own consciousness. So by evolving ourselves, by doing those practices that we mentioned briefly before, like meditation, and there's a variety of others that we'll talk about in a moment, we actually help humanity evolve. When we evolve, that incrementally, just a little bit, pushes forward the whole evolutionary endeavor. So the third big idea, so the first, just to remind you, the first big idea was that we live in an evolving universe. Second one was that evolution is continuing through humanity's consciousness. The third one is that we evolve better if we do integral informed practice. So integral theory gives us a map of all of the areas of human development, because it synthesizes, like, Tibetan Buddhism, Zen, Hindu Tantra, Kabbalah, Jewish Kabbalah, like all the mystical traditions, but also science, but also the philosophical traditions, but also the political traditions. It synthesizes all of that. And I mean, I don't know why political traditions are important to development. I should have said psychology, but anyway. And it comes up with this comprehensive map of how humans evolve and how we develop. And it highlights three main areas. There's growing up, which is that capacity for meaning making that we just mentioned. And specific practices here to support this is like exposure to many cultures, perspectives and complex environments, and also wide reading. Also meditation and changing our state of consciousness also helps there. Waking up, so this develops our spirituality, the extent to which we can stay in a good inner space that feels filled with love and light and a sense of interconnectedness. Specific practices here is like meditation, prayer, and the guru-disciple relationship, and others. Cleaning up, this is where we develop our psycho-emotional side. This is through things like therapy, self-inquiry, and journaling. And so the idea is that if we do all of these, if we grow in all of these ways and do all these kinds of practices, we'll evolve in the most comprehensive and full way possible, which is good for us and also good for the world. And so this integral map helps us identify specific strengths and weaknesses in our growth. We might say, hey, we're really strong in growing up, but weak in waking up. So we want to address that. It helps us create a balanced suite of personal practices. So we try to, do practices in each of these areas. And then also it helps us diagnose the origin of specific pathologies that we encounter in ourselves and in our lives, and identify effective counterbalancing practices. So if we have a specific like if, there's a problem in our life, like in our relationships, for example, there's a particular thing keeps cropping up as an issue for us. This map will help us diagnose more precisely exactly, is this an emotional issue, or is this a spiritual issue? Is this a psychological issue? And so on. And so we can narrow in to the specific form of pathology and identify an effective counterbalancing practice using this map. Any comments or questions or thoughts?
Yeah, Geordie. So who can diagnose this for me? Do I need like an integral doctor, or do I need a guru, or
Yeah, you need
can you do it?
an integral witch doctor.
Awesome.
Or Shane. No, well, you can do it yourself more. So if you're read the integral literature, so like Ken Wilber's books or other authors who are that way inclined, or part of the there's a whole like integral movement and group of authors and things. And if you read their work, that will help you engage in that self-diagnosis a little bit better, which I think you probably would have discovered, Kieran, through your integral readings, that by that reading these kinds of people who have these big picture views of our development helps you work out precisely what kind of issues you're dealing with. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, but also there's coaches. You can like get I've been coached by a couple of sort of explicitly integral authors or meditation teachers and things, and that was helpful too, because they've got years, decades sometimes, synthesizing knowledge from so many different traditions, and they've seen so many people go through different kinds of growth and development. So yeah, it's also good to get coached. And there's many courses. We can talk more about specific courses and things about how to do that. Yeah. Anything else at this stage, Wendy?
Yeah. A couple of questions. And the first one is a couple of slides back, where the integral level, you've called it egalitarian and technocratic. And I'm questioning the technocratic. That kind of means something different to me from what I expect to see there.
Well, so what, I didn't want to get into the nitty gritty here, because this was just me, I kind of created this table, and was trying to articulate what integral societies would look like. But I think with egalitarian, you know, the way I understand egalitarian is they're societies that are very, very equal, and which is really fantastic. But one of the risks with a society that treats everyone equally is it may not recognize that different people have particular strengths and particular expertise in certain areas. And so by technocratic, I meant like a society that values not just the inherent worth of every human being, but also realizes that certain people will be more developed or evolved in certain lines than others. And so there's some value in people having maybe different levels of authority or different levels, their voice being heard maybe a little bit more. If you're a professor of, I guess already we have this in our society, but if you're a professor of, you know, epidemiology, then, you know, you're going to have a more authoritative view on coronavirus than maybe the average lay person. And so it's that, and I guess, you know, we see this in spiritual communities as well, where there have been these models of teachers and students and kind of spiritual hierarchy, which has its flaws, but also has some real benefits to it. And so that's what I mean. I guess I'm just trying to suggest that an integral society would both tremendously value every person, but also find a way to also honor the different people in different areas will have strengths.
Yeah.
Would you say, Jody, that that's something like a good blend of diversity and hierarchy?
Yeah. And I think a great example, you know, because we all say like absolute power corrupts absolutely, you know, power corrupts. I watched with my parents 10 Questions with the Dalai Lama the other night, and this guy, you know, he's like worshipped as the God King by his whole, like, imagine if everyone worshipped Scott Morrison as like God King, you know, and yet he's done a pretty good job. He's pretty incredible human being, and a lot of others, like a lot of other people who would be worshipped in that way and have that much power and authority, would screw things up majorly. And so it does talk to the fact that consciousness can evolve, and if we're more evolved, we're able to hold positions of authority better. Then I'm not saying that we need a God King, you know, I mean, he stepped down from the political position because he thinks that democracy is the way to go. Yeah, that's so that's just another thing. Yeah. Anything else? Very good. So that's the kind of 3 ideas of integral. So we live in an evolving universe. This evolution continues through humanity's consciousness, and we can contribute to humanity's evolution by maxing out our own evolution. And Integral Melbourne was a space with this in mind. So we like the integral theory because it's all about integrating as many views as possible. And so we like making that the basis of our community, because if we make our community, the philosophy, anything more limited, it will end up getting stuck and rigid. And whereas this, hopefully, if we have this as our philosophy, the idea is we can keep evolving with the times. And so, yeah, that's the idea. So Sid and I, when we were a little bit, when Sid was a little bit younger and less hairy, we got to hang out with Ken Wilber. This was the beginning of last year. And so, you know, how has this helped me personally? So I really felt that this theory has given me a beautiful sense of the big picture of the universe and seeing that evolution is everywhere. It's given me an inspiring vision of humanity's purpose. It's just amazing to me that like we are the culmination of a 14 billion year long process, like an ancient process. Like that's us. And like back to that self-compassion and self-acceptance point of view, like what a beautiful narrative for who we are, rather than the materialistic consumer narrative that we are these not good enough, not attractive enough, not smart enough, not, you know, strong enough beings. No, we're like the culmination of this 14 billion year long evolving process, and our we're like vessels for like the most complex consciousness that we know of. That's like a very beautiful, I think, narrative around who we are. I also like it gives us this beautiful view that, like, for the first time, evolution is able to see and understand itself through us. So for 14 billion years, the universe has been becoming more complex and integrated in various corners of the universe, but it's not known that. But through humans, we actually can know that and understand it and reflect upon that. And so that's amazing. Like the eyes of evolution. And also that for the first time, we can consciously steer our own evolution. If we wanted to, if enough human beings decided we wanted to do it, we could design lifestyles for ourselves that brought out the best in humanity and that truly evolved. We truly all decided to evolve together and become, make it that the Dalai Lama's level of consciousness is the average. And but I think that sort of thing's possible if we all work together and had a common vision about what life is like. What's our vision for the world? Is our vision to all become consumers and to just have mansions and be celebrities and, is that our vision? Or like this gives us a much bigger, more beautiful vision that's actually more in line with our own desires and needs and actually would work for everybody and be sustainable and so on. So that I love that idea of like, let's all be evolvers and evolve ourselves and try to evolve the world. And instead of destroying everything, let's create the most beautiful garden planet ever where we all just become, light beings. And then we can travel to other planets and like help out other conscious beings on those planets, help them evolve. So anyway, so that's that. And then an inspiring vision for my own life. So this idea that I can consciously evolve myself and serve the evolution of humanity in the universe. And that I'm able to do this and I'm alive during a momentous period in the 14 billion year long journey. Because during our lifetime, the most sophisticated species may either self-destruct or evolve sublimely or something in between. But that's an amazing time. Like, wow, like in this big, like 14 billion years, like where this like slither, our lifetime's like this slither and there's so much action going down on planet Earth. And we not only get to watch the movie of this, we get to be on the stage and make decisions that edge ourselves a little bit in the right direction, which has a little bit of a influence on the macro. So that's what it's meant for me. Now I've got a guided meditation that I wanted to do to kind of help some of these concepts become a little more visceral and a little bit more like felt. Did anyone have any other comments or questions before we do that? Sidhu.
Hey, beautiful. I just wanted to add something on what Deep said earlier on. I wanted to share that in response, Deep, that Ken Wilber has this beautiful line where he says, spirit is not found at any particular destination, but in the process itself. And so that just kind of goes to that point about self-compassion. And it's like in any model of growth and transcendence, when we create a sort of hierarchy, there's going to be something that we're kind of aiming towards, like a North Star, kind of gives us something to aim for. But like at the same time, as part of that growing process, like on one of those metrics of development anyway, what you're eventually growing towards is just an acceptance of the present moment just the way it is anyway. So it's like at the same time that you're trying to grow, you're also just being here, right now. And it's like that, it's that process itself that has the meaning, not any particular destination. And at any given point, we might create a model that has one particular thing that seems like the most perfect. But what seemed the most perfect maybe 5,000 years ago to us is just like not that perfect anymore. And what seems perfect to us now, 5,000 years from now, there might be something that's like way more developed than that too. So just a thought that I had. So that line from Ken Wilber is, spirit is not found at any particular destination, but in the process itself.
Wow.
Great, thank you. I love
Wow.
that.
Can
Thanks, Sid.
Can I just add something to what Sid said? I absolutely love what you said, Sid. And I remember when I was struggling to be a perfect parent, or at least a better parent, you know, and I remember somebody saying that you don't have to be doing the parenting perfectly for the kids to get that, for the kids to get what you're trying to, help them grow into, and to be being a good parent. It's the fact that you're working on it and you're committed to it and you're growing that they feel more than where you are right at that point. That's the same as what you were saying, but in that practical context. Well, that's where it was for me, because it was so important to be perfect, to be a perfect parent. And so there's a lot of talk about being a good enough parent, but actually being the growing parent, the committed.
Thanks, Wendy.
That's lovely.
Beautiful. So, shall we meditate?